All right, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Jeremy Ruprecht, and today I'm joined by John Shields. We're implementation managers with CDI, and today's webinar topic is Keep, Toss, or Return. What are you doing with all that content from last year? In today's webinar, we will be covering managing records with Laserfiche, the records destruction process, state retention considerations, digital versus physical records, and how to overcome resistance. But before we get started, let's cover some general housekeeping items. For this meeting, participants will be muted. If you have any questions at all, please post them in the question box as seen on the right side of the slide. Slides and screenshots of this webinar will be available upon request, and the session will be recorded and uploaded to CDI's YouTube channel for future reference. So first up, let's talk about some commonly misunderstood records management terms and what they mean when using Laserfiche. Some of you may be used to the term retention schedule, referring to an approved document for the organization that defines what constitutes a record and what should be done with each record. And this document takes into consideration applicable laws, regulations, and policies to determine acceptable levels of risk pertaining to each record. However, when we refer to a retention schedule in Laserfiche, we're only referring to the length of time a record must be retained and what happens to that record after this period expires. For example, a common retention schedule in Laserfiche would be 2 years then destroy, as opposed to the retention schedule being the full list of what to do with every type of record. This focuses on what needs to happen to a single type of record. The cutoff instruction defines what date or event causes the record to transition from being active to inactive. Once the document becomes inactive, the retention period begins, and the document can no longer be changed by anyone without records management privileges in Laserfiche. Some common examples of cutoff instructions are end of calendar year, end of fiscal year, after audit date, or separation from agency date. Cutoff instructions can be time-based, event-based, or a combination of the two. Now, if a cutoff instruction is time-based, the cutoff instruction uses a filing date to determine when the retention period begins. This is the date the document is created by default, but it can be defined and updated by the user or by a workflow. Now, if the cutoff instruction is event-based, then we'll use an event date to determine the start of the retention period. These events are defined when creating the cutoff instructions in Laserfiche Admin Console. Common examples could include an audit date, an expiration date, case close date, or a separation date. And finally, disposition is the action taken on the document when it reaches the end of its life cycle. The disposition could be to destroy, retain permanently, transfer to archives, or transfer to another designated organization. In Laserfiche, the disposition action is defined in the retention schedule in the admin console. So for a retention schedule of 2 years, then destroy would be the final disposition action. Now, in this webinar, we'll also be referring to a disposition report. Now, this is a report that can be built with a workflow to send a list of documents that have lived out their life cycle and are now ready for final disposition. This is sent to one or more records managers for them to decide if the files are ready for final disposition and need to be held on to. Let's take a closer look at this process and see how it can work when your organization has multiple records managers, each working with their own set of files. So the disposition report workflow runs in the background on a schedule. Typically, this is once a month, but it could be run more or less often depending on your specific needs. It can also be tailored to only run on specific file types or on specific months. For example, you could have a monthly disposition report, but it only includes contracts once a year in December because that's the only time that the records manager needs to review them. The workflow itself creates a list of all records that are ready for final disposition, and it sends an email to the records managers with information about the records and links to view them in the Laserfiche web client. The links can either take the records manager directly to the individual document or to a list of search results in the web client, which includes all documents on the disposition report. Different disposition reports can easily be sent to different department heads or records managers based on the information in a metadata field, such as the department field, the template used on a document, or even the location of the document in the repository. When viewing the list of search results in the web client, each department head or records manager will see a list of records unique to them. Then they can make their own decisions about which files to keep and which to get rid of without it affecting the other records or the other records managers. And here's John Shields to talk about how to locate your retention schedule.
Thank you, Jeremy. So every state and local agency has a retention schedule. That retention schedule is usually prescribed by law, and it can be found in a number of places, typically in the Code of Federal Regulations for federal organizations, or on a state attorney general's office website or state archives website. In front of you, you can see that there are 3 separate retention schedules. And while they look a little bit different based on format, the structure is essentially the same. Each one of them has some sort of reference number. Washington calls it disposition authority number, Illinois calls it a record series, and Texas calls it an item number series, a record series item number, excuse me. But essentially, these retention schedules all have the same basic information. A number used to identify what the information is associated with, a basic description of what the record is, and what you're going to do with it when you're completed with it. If you're in the private or nonprofit sector, oftentimes you have to derive this information from international laws, federal, state, and local laws, and build this document yourself. That can be somewhat cumbersome, and it's always important to make sure that that document, once completed, is reviewed regularly and reviewed by your legal department and provided legal guidance. So let's talk about the records themselves. We have digital records, which many people are familiar with now, and physical records, the holdovers from the yesteryear. So one of the main questions that we often get is, can I digitize all my physical records? The answer to that is, it depends. And the reason it depends is because there's some records that your organization might keep where the record itself is the value, provides value to the organization. Some examples of this might be old maps or archived images such as paintings or photographs that don't have an original or a negative. But there are some records that you might not want to digitize. And so oftentimes we ask the question, do I have to digitize all of my physical records? Now in the image on the right, you can see that there's a sticky board full of sticky notes. And it's really important that we take a step back and review whether or not we're going to add value to the organization by digitizing the records. Sticky notes might contain information that's important, but it might be best that the information from that is consolidated somewhere and kept for notes with a project. Scanning each individual note, especially when most of them are going to be destroyed within days or weeks of their usefulness, is probably not something the organization will want to take on. So some questions to ask yourself when you're looking at, do I have to or can I digitize a record? Is the document destroyed shortly after creation? Does the format allow for easy digitization? Large maps, artwork, books, those might be things that are really difficult to convert into a digital format. Is it an essential record? Are we needing to keep this record in 2 locations? What is the risk associated with keeping the record in physical form? Can it be secured? Is there a risk of water damage or fire damage? And if it is transferred to the archives or another organization, do they want the original or do they accept digitized versions of it? So what are the advantages of digital records? One of the primary advantages is search. You can see that image on the bottom right. If you had to find a particular person's name in all those books, you would actually have to go through each one and look at it. And you would probably not have time to do that and then you would actually not have the confidence that you have found every single instance if you did look manually. So it allows you to search. It allows you to build reporting tools for monitoring your records, which allows you to see about the frequency records are used, how often they're created, and things of that nature. You can control access, which greatly reduces risk of privacy incidents or just the overall disclosure of information that may be more of a sensitive nature to the organization. Access can be tracked and audited. So at any one time, you can review your audit records and know where the information has been viewed, when it has been viewed, and who viewed it. It becomes a central location for sharing documents and for collaboration. Laserfiche specifically is very well suited for this, as the repository looks an awful lot like the traditional shared drive that most individuals are used to using. And so folder structure and navigation is very similar, although the search is very powerful. And it allows for you to check out a document, make changes to it, and check it back in, identifying and keeping the versioning up to date. It can also help you reduce the physical space in your office and increase the ability to add other options, such as more desks or vending machines or something of that nature. I once worked with an organization who converted their entire file room into a lobby for their employees. So after all the filing cabinets and everything were removed, they were able to go in there and use that as a new break room. In addition to being able to reduce space and control everything, you can actually control who prints and who shares the document. You can actually put restrictions on more sensitive documents so that they cannot be shared or printed without special levels of permission. So now that we've talked about the physical records and the digital records, let's talk about what happens when you face a little bit of resistance trying to get people to adopt your enterprise content management system. So one of the biggest issues that we have is that people don't necessarily want to participate. Policies maybe don't support the change. And people have the mindset of, what's wrong with the way we've always done it? So organizations are a collection of people, policies, and goals. And in small organizations, resistance can often be overcome by authority alone. Somebody from the top will just say, we're going to do that. But in larger organizations, you have to sell the idea to the organization. And this is a practice we call change management. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of change management, let's talk a little bit about the people that you need to influence. So we have this roughly broken into 5 groups. And in here, we have our tech enthusiasts, the people who are going to just grab on and leech onto everything that you put out there because it's new, it's innovative, and it's exciting. I usually call these people early adopters, and they intrinsically understand the need for the program, even if they don't understand the details. Next on here, you see the visionaries. The visionaries are kind of like a peer adopter. They see the people before them adopt it, and they say, oh, this is probably a good idea. They see others around them, and they want to be part of that. They see a usefulness for it, and so they join in. Now, the majority of the people are pragmatists. These are the people that adopt it because it's a policy, and policy should be followed. Now, what I found oftentimes working in large organizations is, while the pragmatists usually have the widest adoption, they actually have the hardest time and greatest difficulty with compliance. So that's something to keep in mind when you're working through your program. Next, you have your late adopters, or the conservative members of your organization, the people who want to know that the change is worthwhile. Sometimes they rally others to their cause, forcing the organization to make adjustments and accommodations. Most of these people eventually fall in line, and ironically, often provide your greatest level of compliance. And then you have that little tail there on the right, the skeptics. Now, this is like that 1% of your organization. These people resist change, oftentimes for the sake of resisting change. People in this category often think they're doing a service for the staff and the organization, and that the staff and organization will be better off because of them. Now, when we talked earlier about about change management, your change management is going to focus mostly on these individuals. So let's talk about how you can get over the resistance. First thing we need to do is create a campaign for your program. And a campaign is a way of selling something to your staff. The organization must understand all aspects of the program. And selling a program means answering difficult questions, considering the unknowns, and planning for scenarios the organization may not have otherwise considered. We create a culture of awareness. And we do that by initializing a relationship action plan. Now, this is a way of building a network across your organization that allows you to target key individuals within the organization and build relationships so that you can move the organization forward as a whole. These are people that you are able to communicate with directly, and they have a great sway or influence over others in the organization. Now, the people we're talking about aren't necessarily other leaders or managers. We all know that there are people within an organization that people naturally gravitate towards, that they take information from, and that are better at sharing and propping up programs. But before we start with any of this, we need to have a purpose statement. So what is a purpose statement? An example of one is to create awareness for and adoption of the records management program to increase compliance with state and federal laws and regulations. Starting with a purpose statement gives me the ability to tie everything I do back to the mission of the organization, and it allows me to further push the mission of the specific program, in this case, records management. So every organization needs to actually focus on how they're going to push this program forward. One of the first things that we need to do is create a proof of concept. Nobody would actually build an airplane without first determining whether it's going to fly. This schematic here is extremely complicated. And if you had to jump from this schematic from paper all the way to just building it out, you would probably fail, and it might not ever make it out of the hangar. When we're doing creating a proof of concept, we actually need to build a process that interacts with everyone. And the way this works is we usually touch on something that all members of an organization have to interact with: an HR department, an accounting department, maybe a transportation department, or a travel process. And that allows you to map out the process, build it up so that others can see positive interactions with the program. By using positive interactions to push people through, it encourages people to talk about the program. Now, one of the best ways to sell something is word of mouth. We've all probably seen many campaigns that started off word of mouth. I can think of Tesla as an example where they didn't advertise for a very long time, and yet every single thing they did, people talked about it. There's other programs out there that use the same mindset, where word of mouth is their best method. So when we're talking about our program, we need to make it exciting. And we can do this through a number of methodologies. First off, training. Training doesn't have to be PowerPoint, talking, reading what's off the slide. It can be engaging. You'll have to make it mandatory so the entire staff understands what is required, but early adopters and peer adopters will take the voluntary training and begin to talk about it with others. When the required training comes around, you'll have a lot of people who have been exposed to the program because of our proof of concept. Interactions making the training more likely to stick. Adopt a train-the-trainer program. Make training positive, memorable, and useful for the audience. Use great imagery. I said exciting. You can see that there's a roller coaster here. There's nothing that gets your blood pumping more than going upside down on a roller coaster. But when we talk about records management, we need to know how they're helping the organization of the customer. We talk to them about being able to destroy things. It's one of my favorite things to do. You know, everybody uses imagery analogous to destroying things. My favorite is, of course, the dumpster fire. When we use the image like this, we actually sear into people's minds that there's there's definitely some destruction going on here. So it's important that this conversation is framed positively. Okay? Do not talk about how much something costs the organization. Nobody wants to hear about the negative. Talk about how much the organization could save and what the organization wants to do with those savings. Just make sure that what you're doing with your program reflects the culture of the organization. Incentivize it in such a way that people are excited to be part of it. And then use simple explanations. Never use 1,000 words when 100 works, and never use words at all when an image conveys the message. Avoid acronyms and jargon. And if acronyms or jargon are necessary, provide a common term or object that can be understood. Prime example, when I'm explaining disposition, I oftentimes use this. Determining the disposition for a record is like tasting the milk after the expiration date. You might be surprised that someone still wants it, but you'll usually throw it out. Now, you could even make a joke about how you are glad records, when they're expired, don't smell like sour milk, but keep it upbeat. Enjoy the conversation. Make people laugh, have them enjoy it, even when you're relaying critical information about laws and regulations. Next, create champions. Laserfiche itself has has a champions program. People who go around and talk about Laserfiche, who build it up. But you can create records management champions as well. And these are people who are natural champions, people who naturally gravitate towards talking about a great product, talking about a great process. These are people who you often see in the 10 minutes before or after a meeting, people gather around them, listening to them, asking them questions. Pick those people's brains, make them useful to your cause. You can use other people as well. So you can create program ownership and buy-in. And when you do this, you're actually giving people a voice, and especially giving people who dissent with your program a voice. It's really important to bring in every single person to the table. Nobody should be left out of the program, creation or rollout. It doesn't mean you use every idea presented and that you put everyone in charge of something. But 15 minutes of time talking and leaving someone feeling like they did something for the program is worth as much time multiplied by the next 5 people who are interacted with. So if I tell someone who is doing something really good that they are doing awesome, they're going to go spread that good news with the next 4 or 5 people they talk to. It's just in our human nature. We're feeling upbeat and feeling excited about something. So let's share that information. Let's keep pushing forward. People want to be able to point something out and say, I helped with that. I suggested that, or I worked on that. Give people an opportunity to do that humble brag about your records management program. So in summary, today we talked about managing records with Laserfiche, the records destruction process, retention considerations, advantages of digital records, and how to overcome organizational resistance. I hope that you've taken something from this, and I hope that you have enjoyed this conversation. At this point, are there any questions? All right, I'm not seeing any questions. If you need more information, you can visit our website or see this video and other videos on our YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, please reach out to Jeremy or any one of our other emails that you see on the screen. And thank you.